The truck jackknifed across both lanes of Highway 41, with a scream of metal so violent that the sound seemed to rip the night open, and for half a second everything was frozen in a terrible, impossible stillness before the sedan slammed into the side of the trailer hard enough to send a spray of shattered glass across the asphalt, like glitter under the headlights of passing cars, the impact echoing across the empty stretch of rural road outside Pine Ridge County, where the fields stretched black and endless under a cold November sky. Ethan Walker gripped the steering wheel of his pickup so tightly that the tendons in his forearms burned, his truck skidding sideways as he fought the brakes, the tires whining against wet pavement until the vehicle lurched to a stop 30 feet from the wreck. His chest was already heaving even before he understood what he had just seen. The smell of burnt rubber and hot metal seeped through the cracked window. For a moment he couldn't move. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. A truck horn wailed somewhere ahead, stuck in a long mechanical scream. Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry, then shoved the door open and stepped out into the cold. The wind coming off the fields cut through his jacket immediately. He jogged toward the wreck, boots slapping against damp asphalt, heart hammering in his ears louder than the horn. The sedan's front end was crushed inward like an accordion, steam rising from the twisted hood. The passenger side door hung open at an angle that looked wrong in a way Ethan didn't want to think about. He slowed as he approached, dread crawling through his stomach. "Hey!" he shouted, voice cracking in the open night. "Hey, can you hear me?" There was no response, only the wind pushing across the empty highway and the relentless blare of the truck horn. Ethan stepped closer, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The driver of the semi had already climbed down from the cab and was standing in the middle of the road with both hands gripping his head. The man looked like he had aged 10 years in 30 seconds. "I didn't see him," the truck driver muttered hoarsely as Ethan passed. "God, I didn't see him at all." Ethan barely registered the words. His attention had locked on the sedan. A figure was slumped behind the steering wheel. The airbag had deployed, but it hung deflated now, smeared with blood. Ethan's stomach twisted. He leaned down to look through the shattered window. The driver's face was turned slightly toward him, illuminated by the flickering hazard lights. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "No," he whispered, before he even realized he had spoken. His throat tightened painfully. "No, no, no." The man in the driver's seat was his younger brother, Luke. Luke's head lolled slightly as Ethan reached through the broken glass and touched his shoulder. The fabric of Luke's jacket was wet. Ethan jerked his hand back instinctively, his breath catching in his chest as he looked down at the dark smear across his fingers. Blood. Too much blood. Panic surged through him like electricity. "Luke," Ethan said, voice shaking now. "Luke, hey buddy, come on, stay with me." Luke didn't respond. His chest moved once, barely noticeable. Ethan leaned in closer, his heartbeat thundering. "Luke," the name tore out of him. The truck driver staggered closer behind him. "You know him?" the man asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. His mind had started racing, fragments of memory flashing through him with brutal clarity. Luke laughing in the driveway back at their mother's house. Luke throwing a football across the yard when they were kids. Luke 2 weeks ago at the Pine Ridge Diner saying he was finally getting his life together. Ethan forced himself to breathe. "Call 911, he snapped without turning around. The truck driver fumbled for his phone immediately. Ethan leaned deeper through the broken window, trying to see how badly Luke was hurt. The steering column had collapsed against his legs. The dashboard was bent inward. Ethan could hear Luke breathing now, but it sounded wrong, shallow and uneven, like air dragging through broken glass. "Stay with me," Ethan murmured desperately. "You hear me? Stay with me." Luke's eyelids twitched faintly, his lips parted. For a moment Ethan thought his brother might actually wake up. Then Luke exhaled a weak breath that carried the faint smell of whiskey. Ethan froze. The scent hit him with a jolt of confusion. Luke didn't drink anymore, not after the mess 2 years ago. Ethan stared at him, dread tightening deeper in his chest. The truck driver was talking loudly into his phone behind him, giving the dispatcher the mile marker and trying to explain the crash through shaking breaths. Ethan barely heard him. Something else had caught his attention. The passenger seat. It was empty, but the door was open. Ethan straightened slowly, looking around the dark roadside. The wind rustled through dry grass along the ditch. "Was there anyone else in the car?" he asked over his shoulder. The truck driver shook his head quickly. "I only saw the sedan when it crossed the center line," he said. "Just the one driver, far as I could tell." Ethan stared down the road again. The open door bothered him. Something about it gnawed at the edge of his mind. Luke wouldn't have been driving with the door half open, unless someone had gotten out. A faint shape moved near the ditch 30 yards away. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Hey!" he he shouted, turning toward it. The truck driver looked up from his phone. The shape shifted again. Someone was there. Ethan started jogging toward the ditch. The cold air burned in his lungs as he ran. As he got closer, the outline became clearer. A woman. She was sitting in the grass, arms wrapped around herself, staring blankly at the wreck as if her mind hadn't caught up with reality yet. Her hair was tangled and streaked with dirt. Blood trickled down the side of her forehead. Ethan slowed, breathing hard. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Are you hurt?" The woman didn't answer at first. Her eyes were wide and unfocused. She looked like she had been dropped into the world without warning. Finally, she whispered, "He said he could drive." Ethan felt something cold twist through his stomach. "Who?" he asked. The woman turned her head slightly toward the wrecked car. "Luke." The name left her lips in a broken breath. Ethan felt the ground shift again beneath him. "You know him?" The woman stared at him now, confusion spreading slowly across her face. "He's my brother," Ethan said quietly. Her expression collapsed into something complicated and painful. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The distant wail of approaching sirens finally cut through the silence. Ethan turned toward the highway again. Red and blue lights flickered faintly over the horizon. The woman spoke again, her voice barely audible. "He wasn't supposed to drive tonight." Ethan looked back at her. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "We left the bar together. I told him I'd call an Uber. He said he was fine." The words hung there, like something fragile and dangerous. Ethan felt anger flash through him, so suddenly it made his hands shake. Luke had promised he was done with that life, promised their mother, promised everyone. The sirens were louder now, echoing across the fields. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. The night felt heavier by the second. Somewhere behind him, the truck horn finally died, leaving the highway wrapped in a deep, unsettling silence that lasted only until the first sheriff's cruiser came tearing around the bend, with lights blazing across the wet pavement. Deputy Carla Ramirez stepped out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped, her boots hitting the asphalt with practiced urgency. As she scanned the scene in a single sweeping glance that took in the jackknifed semi, the crushed sedan, the bystanders scattered across the roadside, and the pale, shaken look on Ethan Walker's face as he stood between the wreck and the injured woman in the ditch. And although she didn't know it yet, this crash was about to unravel a chain of secrets buried deep inside Pine Ridge County. Secrets that had been quietly poisoning lives for years and would soon pull Ethan into a storm of betrayal, guilt, and choices that would fracture everything he thought he understood about his own family. Deputy Carla Ramirez moved first toward the sedan, one hand already on the radio clipped to her shoulder while the other lifted in a sharp gesture for Ethan and the truck driver to back away, and the authority in her voice cut through the chaos with a steadiness that almost made the scene feel containable, even though nothing about it was. "County EMS is 2 minutes out," she said. "Everybody step back and let me see what I'm working with." Ethan didn't move immediately. His body was still angled toward Luke's crushed car, as if pure will could hold his brother together until the ambulance arrived. Carla recognized him then. Her eyes narrowed for half a second, not in suspicion yet, but in the hard way a local cop's eyes changed when a wreck stopped being paperwork and turned personal. "Ethan," she said, softer now, "I need room." He stepped back because he understood procedure, and because there was something in Carla's expression that told him she was already worried the way officers got worried when they had seen enough wrecks to know the difference between salvageable and catastrophic. He stumbled 2 paces and turned slightly away, dragging cold air into lungs that suddenly felt too small. Across the ditch, the injured woman tried to stand and nearly collapsed again, and Ethan went to her on instinct, crouching at her side while Carla peered into the sedan and asked dispatch to expedite fire rescue for extraction tools. "Hey," Ethan said quietly. "Stay seated. Don't get up yet." The woman's teeth chattered. Whether from cold or shock, he couldn't tell. Gravel clung to the side of her coat, and one heel of her boot was snapped clean off. She looked like somebody who had been torn out of a moving life and dropped into a nightmare without warning. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked at him twice before answering. "Tessa." Her voice was thin and distant. "Tessa Bell." Ethan nodded, as if the name alone gave them something solid to hold on to. "Did you hit your head?" She touched the side of her forehead and looked at the blood on her fingers with dull surprise. "I guess." Her eyes drifted past him toward the wreck. "Is he dead?" Ethan opened his mouth and found that he couldn't make a clean answer. "No," he said finally, though even to his own ears it sounded like a bargain made with fear instead of a fact. "No, he's breathing." Tessa shut her eyes. Relief should have crossed her face, but what came instead was something knotted and painful, almost like guilt. Fire rescue pulled in behind the ambulance in a howl of diesel and flashing lights, illuminating the wet highway, the bent guardrail, the black fields, the steam rising from ruined engines. The whole scene took on that surreal emergency room brightness that made blood look darker and people's skin look pale and unreal. Paramedics spilled out with gear and practiced movements. One knelt beside Tessa immediately, wrapping a reflective blanket around her shoulders and asking her questions in a calm, repetitive tone designed for shock victims. Another team moved to Luke, their boots crunching over broken glass as hydraulic cutters were unloaded from the fire truck. Ethan stood there uselessly, hands flexing at his sides, trying not to hear every metallic groan as the rescuers prepared to peel his brother out of the car. Carla came over to him then, her notepad already out though she hadn't written anything yet. Her dark hair was pulled tight at the back of her neck, and the cold had painted the tips of her ears red. "You want to tell me what you know?" she asked. Ethan let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "I know my brother was supposed to be home by 9. I know he told my mom he was done drinking. I know I just found him bleeding out on the side of a road." Carla held his gaze. "Did you talk to him tonight?" "No." Ethan rubbed a hand over his mouth. "He texted around 7, asked if I could cover his shift tomorrow at the feed supply store. I didn't answer right away. Then he sent a thumbs up around 8:30. That was it." Carla watched him another second. Pine Ridge was small enough that she knew the Walkers the way everybody in law enforcement knew families that were always somehow adjacent to trouble, without being fully consumed by it. Their father had died years earlier in a machinery accident. Their mother, June Walker, taught 3rd grade until she retired. Luke had 1 DUI at 23, 1 bar fight that nearly turned into felony assault, 6 months in county probation, then 2 years of trying to look reformed in a town that never forgot. Ethan was the reliable son, contractor, volunteer baseball coach, paid bills on time, the one people pointed to when they said one brother got the father's steadiness and the other got the father's temper. Carla lowered her voice. "The woman says they left Dalton's bar together." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, she told me. She says Luke insisted on driving." He looked away toward the ambulance. Firefighters were cutting through the passenger side frame now, sparks flying in brief bursts against the darkness. "Then that's what happened." Carla didn't write that down yet. "You sound angry." Ethan stared at the wreck without blinking. "My brother might die tonight. I'm trying not to be anything." She let the silence sit between them. She knew pressure sometimes made people talk, and sometimes it shut them down completely. Before she could say more, one of the paramedics shouted that they had Luke accessible. The stretcher wheels rattled over the road. Ethan took a step forward before Carla touched his arm. "Wait." He stopped because he had spent his life controlling himself precisely for moments like this, and because part of him was suddenly afraid of seeing Luke's face up close under good light. When they finally brought Luke free, strapped and braced and masked with oxygen, Ethan felt a sick drop inside his chest. Luke looked younger unconscious. The hard edges he'd built over the past few years, the defensive grin, the restless eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw, all of it had vanished. He looked like the 19-year-old version of himself again, the brother who used to sleep through church and beg Ethan for rides into town and swear every new mistake would be the last one. A paramedic moved quickly past Ethan, but Luke's hand swung slightly off the edge of the stretcher for a second, and Ethan caught it before they lifted him into the ambulance. The hand was cold and limp. "You don't get to do this to her," Ethan whispered, not even sure whether he meant their mother or Tessa or himself. "You don't get to." Luke didn't stir. The ambulance doors shut with a hard metallic slam that echoed louder than it should have. Carla spoke with the paramedic through the open front window, got the hospital destination, then turned back toward Ethan. "You can follow them, but I need a statement first." He nodded once. The movement felt mechanical. Tessa was being helped to a second ambulance now. Her eyes found Ethan's, and there was something pleading in them, something frightened beyond the obvious fear of injury. He almost went to her, almost asked what else she wasn't saying, but Carla had already started with her questions, and the flashing lights made the whole road feel like a stage where every hesitation might matter later. "What time were you driving southbound?" Carla asked. "Around 10:40, maybe a little before." "Where from?" "Job site, I'm off County Road 8. We're pouring footings for the Bennett addition tomorrow." She wrote that down. "Did you see the sedan cross the center line?" "I saw headlights drift. Then the truck started swerving. Then impact." "Did it look deliberate?" Ethan snapped his head toward her. "Deliberate?" Carla kept her tone flat. "I'm asking because the road is straight here. Weather's bad, but not that bad. No skid marks from the sedan yet. I need to know what you saw." Ethan ran both hands over his face. The skin there felt numb from cold and stress. He replayed the moment. The lights, the sideways trailer, the way the sedan had seemed to commit to the wrong lane without correction, At the time, it had felt like drunk driving, or panic, or exhaustion. But deliberate? The word lodged in him unpleasantly. I saw drift, he said slowly. Not a hard turn, just drift. Carla made a note. All right. Her gaze shifted beyond him, toward Luke's car, now sitting open like a gutted animal under emergency floodlights. I'll need to search the vehicle once it's towed. Ethan let out a brittle breath. Go ahead. If there's alcohol or narcotics in the car, toxicology will matter. I said go ahead. She studied him a beat longer, then tucked the pad away. Drive careful. Hospital's already calling in trauma. Ethan started toward his truck, but stopped when he heard Tessa calling his name from beside the second ambulance. Her voice was hoarse and unsteady. Ethan. He crossed to her quickly. The paramedic gave them a few seconds. Tessa gripped the blanket around her shoulders with trembling fingers. Under the harsh lights, her face looked drained and older than he'd first thought. Maybe early 30s, with the strained beauty of someone who had spent too long pretending to be fine. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Ethan glanced toward Carla automatically. The deputy was turned away, speaking with the truck driver. Then tell me. Tessa wet her lips. Not here. The answer hit him like a slap. He stared at her. My brother is being loaded into an ambulance and you're telling me not here? Her eyes filled instantly, but she held his gaze. Please, at the hospital. Ethan looked at her for a long second, anger and dread grinding together inside him. Then the paramedic was urging her into the ambulance, and the moment was gone. Ethan watched the doors shut, then went back to his truck in a daze. The drive to Pine Ridge County Hospital took 13 minutes, though later he would only remember pieces of it. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers, the red taillights of the ambulance pulling away from him on dark stretches of road, the radio muted because he couldn't bear sound, the smell of wet denim and blood still on his hands. The county hospital sat on the edge of town near the old football field, and the Methodist church, a low brick building that always looked more tired at night, its fluorescent entryway throwing a flat white glow over the parking lot. Ethan parked crooked without noticing and walked fast toward the emergency entrance, the cold automatic doors opening on a burst of warm antiseptic air that smelled of bleach, coffee, and stale fear. Inside, everything was too bright. A television mounted in the corner played a muted weather report. A child coughed somewhere behind a curtain. A woman at the reception desk looked up with the exhausted professional sympathy of someone who could identify fresh trauma from the look in a person's eyes alone. Family of motor vehicle accident victim? She asked. Ethan nodded. Luke Walker. She checked a screen. They're still in trauma. You can wait over there. Wait. The word felt obscene, but he went to the row of molded plastic chairs anyway, and sat only because his knees had suddenly begun to feel unreliable. The hospital heating was set too high. He could feel the dried blood tightening on his skin. In the chair across from him, a man in work boots slept with his chin on his chest. A vending machine hummed softly against the far wall. Time thickened. Ethan stared at the double doors leading into trauma care and tried not to think at all, because every thought was worse than the last. What if Luke died? What if he lived but never woke up? What if he woke up drunk and furious and unreachable the way he used to after bad nights? What if this was only the first call, and their mother's call would come next, and Ethan would have to tell her that the son she'd spent years trying to save had wrapped his car around a semi on Highway 41 because promises had turned out to be cheap again? His phone vibrated in his pocket. Mom. He stared at the screen until it nearly stopped ringing, then answered. Hey. June Walker knew from the first syllable. Mothers often did. What happened? She asked. Her voice was too calm, which meant terror was already underneath it. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and pressed a hand over his eyes. Luke's been in a wreck. The silence on the other end was short, but in it Ethan could picture her standing in her kitchen beneath the yellow hanging light, one hand gripping the counter, face draining of color. Is he alive? She whispered. Ethan swallowed. Yes, he's in trauma now. I'm coming. Mom, don't drive fast. Don't tell me how to drive. The sharpness in her voice was familiar and almost comforting. It meant she hadn't collapsed. It meant she was still functioning. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line clicked dead. Ethan let the phone fall into his lap and sat like that until a cup of coffee appeared in front of him. He looked up. Carla Ramirez stood there now out of her patrol jacket, in the dark brown deputy uniform beneath, damp hair curling slightly at the temples from the mist outside. Hospital machine coffee, she said. It's terrible, but it's hot. Ethan took it because refusing would have required energy. Thanks. Carla sat 2 chairs away. Not quite a friend, not quite only a cop. Wrecker's got the sedan. I put in for toxicology once they stabilize him. Ethan nodded. Any update from the scene? Open bottle under the passenger seat. Vodka. Ethan stared into the coffee. It smelled burnt and bitter. That hers or his? Don't know yet. She paused. Found something else. He looked up. Carla's expression had gone careful. Envelope under the driver's seat. Cash inside. 12,000, give or take. Ethan blinked once, not understanding at first. Cash? Band wrapped. No bank slip. No note. The warmth went out of the coffee cup in his hands, though the liquid was still steaming. Luke didn't have $12,000. Carla watched him closely. That was my thought too. He sat back slowly. Somewhere inside him, fear shifted shape. It was no longer only about his brother dying. It was becoming something wider, darker, with roots. Maybe it wasn't his. Maybe, Carla said. But if your brother was carrying that kind of money drunk on a county highway at 10:40 on a Thursday night, I need to know whether he got mixed up in something. Ethan gave a hard, humorless exhale. In Pine Ridge? What exactly do you think he got mixed up in, Carla? Cartel money. I think people in small towns say not here, right before they find out it was here the whole time. The sentence landed heavily. Ethan looked away. Through the glass doors he could see headlights sweep the parking lot. His mother's Buick turned in too fast, tires crunching over the curb before correcting. He stood before the car had fully stopped outside. June Walker came through the entrance, still wearing the cardigan she used for evenings at home. Gray hair loose around her shoulders, reading glasses hanging from a chain at her chest. She looked small until she saw Ethan, and then something hard and commanding took over her whole body. Where is he? She asked. Ethan stood and caught her by the elbows. Still in trauma. June's eyes searched his face the way she had when he was a boy trying to hide pain. How bad? She asked. Ethan hesitated a fraction too long. Her mouth tightened. Don't lie to me. Pretty bad, he said quietly. June inhaled through her nose, once, steadying herself. Then she noticed Carla. Deputy. Carla stood. Mrs. Walker. June nodded curtly. She had taught Carla's younger sister in 3rd grade and once sent casseroles when Carla's father died. But the familiarity of small-town history didn't soften her now. Was he drinking? She asked. No preamble. No denial. Just the knife, straight to the center. Ethan looked at Carla, and that was answer enough. June closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there were tears there, but the anger was stronger. I told him, she said, almost to herself. I told him one more time, and it would kill him or kill somebody else. Her voice broke on the last word, and Ethan stepped closer, but she straightened before he could fully comfort her. She had spent too many years surviving disappointment to break quickly. Who was with him? Ethan glanced toward the hall where they had taken Tessa. A woman named Tessa Bell. June frowned. I don't know that name. Neither do I, Carla said. She's got minor injuries. I haven't formally interviewed her yet. She asked to speak with Ethan first. June turned sharply. Why? Ethan answered before Carla could. She says there's something she needs to tell me. June stared at him, and for a moment he saw fear in her that had nothing to do with the crash itself. It was older fear, the kind that comes from years of suspecting that the person you love is hiding parts of his life you cannot reach. Before anyone could say more, the trauma doors opened, and a surgeon in blue scrubs stepped into the waiting area with the controlled exhaustion of a man who had already delivered too much bad news in one career. Family of Luke Walker? Ethan and June moved at once. Carla stood but stayed back. The surgeon introduced himself as Dr. Patel. His tone was measured, practiced, but not cold. Your son and brother has multiple injuries, he said. Severe internal bleeding from splenic rupture, a fractured pelvis, 2 broken ribs, and significant head trauma. We've stabilized his airway and controlled what bleeding we could, but he needs surgery immediately. June's hand found Ethan's forearm and gripped so hard her knuckles blanched. Will he live? She asked. Dr. Patel paused exactly 1 beat too long. He has a chance, he said, but the next few hours are critical. Ethan felt those words enter him like ice water. A chance. Not a promise. Not even probability. Dr. Patel continued explaining the consent forms, the risks, the possibility of swelling in the brain, the need to move quickly. But Ethan only retained fragments. June signed where they told her to sign because Luke was unmarried and she was next of kin. Her hand shook only once. When the doctor left, the room seemed to drop into a new level of silence, one where every sound became unnatural. The squeak of shoes on tile, the vending machine whirring, the distant crackle of a police radio clipped to Carla's shoulder. June sat finally, not because she wanted to, but because her body demanded it. Ethan crouched in front of her. Mom. She touched his face with both hands in a quick, almost absent gesture that belonged to his childhood, then let them fall. I knew something was wrong this week, she said. He kept canceling dinner. He wouldn't look at me straight on Sunday. I thought maybe he was ashamed because he'd slipped. I didn't think. She stopped, her lips pressed together. Ethan looked down. He remembered Sunday too. Luke had shown up late to their mother's roast dinner, cheeks flushed, joking too loudly, hugging June longer than usual before leaving early because he said he had a headache. Ethan had noticed all of it, and let it pass because he was tired of playing parole officer to a grown man. The realization cut at him now with fresh cruelty. He should have pushed. He should have followed. He should have done any of the 1,000 useless things people imagine after disaster, because the alternative is admitting they never had control at all. Carla's phone buzzed. She stepped away to answer it, voice low. Across the waiting room, the hallway door opened again, and Tessa Bell emerged in a wheelchair, released from initial treatment but still pale under the fluorescent lights, an adhesive strip over the cut at her hairline. A nurse parked her near the wall and told her someone would bring discharge papers. Tessa's gaze moved immediately to Ethan. June followed it. That her? She asked. Ethan nodded. June rose before he could stop her. She walked toward Tessa with the slow, deliberate posture of a woman holding herself together by force alone. Ethan followed half a step behind, unsure whether he was escorting his mother or intervening. Tessa looked up at June and instantly seemed to understand exactly who she was. Shame flooded her face. Mrs. Walker, she said faintly. June stood over her. Were you with my son tonight? Tessa swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Were you drinking with him? Ethan heard the steel in June's voice and braced for impact. Tessa's fingers knotted in the blanket over her lap. Yes. June closed her eyes once, gathered herself, then asked the question that mattered most. Did you hand him the keys? No, Tessa said quickly, tears springing to her eyes. No, I told him not to drive. I fought with him about it in the parking lot. I should have taken the keys anyway. I know that. But I didn't. I didn't. June stared at her, pain tightening every line of her face. Why were you with him? Tessa looked toward Ethan now, then back to June, as if she understood that whatever she said next would split the night open in a different way. Because he was helping me, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. Helping you with what? Tessa's breathing turned shallow. She glanced once toward Carla, who had ended her phone call and was already watching. Then Tessa said, My husband is Deputy Sheriff Ben Bell. Ethan felt the world shift again, quieter this time but no less violently. Carla stopped moving altogether. June frowned in confusion first, then recognition. Ben Bell. 3 years in the sheriff's office, clean-cut, church on Sundays, shook hands too hard. Smiled with all his teeth and none of his eyes. Ethan had seen him 100 times. You're married to Bell? He said. Tessa nodded once. Luke found out Ben was stealing evidence money, she whispered. And not just money. Carla was beside them now, her face unreadable except for the muscles working once in her jaw. Start at the beginning, she said. Tessa looked like she might be sick, but she began anyway, because whatever had been chasing her all night was clearly worse than the fear of speaking. Ben works narcotics evidence part-time for county intake, she said. A few months ago, I found cash in our garage in an old deer feed bin. More cash than he could explain. He told me it was from sports betting. Then I found pills in a lockbox, the kind with evidence tags still on some of the bags. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me to mind my own business. After that, he started checking my phone. He got mean. Real mean. June's mouth tightened. Ethan felt a slow, sick anger building in his chest. Tessa continued, voice trembling. I knew Luke from high school. Not well, but enough. I ran into him at the grocery store last month. I don't know why I said anything to him. Maybe because he looked like somebody who already understood bad decisions. Maybe because he actually listened. Her eyes filled again. He said, if I could get proof, he knew somebody outside the sheriff's office who'd take it seriously. He said he had messed up enough in life that maybe helping once could count for something. Ethan looked away for a second because the sentence sounded too much like Luke, too close to the raw, hopeful thing he sometimes carried under all his self-destruction. Carla folded her arms. And tonight? Tessa looked at her. Tonight Luke called and said he had enough to go to the state investigators. He told me to meet him at Dalton's because Ben was working late and he didn't want to come to my house. He had copies, photos, tag numbers. I brought the cash because he said if there was missing evidence money, they'd need to trace the serial bans or something. He said don't trust local law enforcement because Ben might not be the only one. Carla's face hardened, not in offense, but in dawning realization. Ethan heard the words and felt them like falling through rotten floorboards. The envelope, he said. Tessa nodded miserably. It was from my garage. Luke was supposed to hand it off tomorrow morning. Ethan stared at her. So why were you in a bar? Because he was scared, Tessa whispered. He said he needed one drink to steady himself before he drove to meet somebody else. The sentence hung there, ugly and tragic and infuriating. Ethan almost laughed from the sheer obscenity of it. One drink. The phrase that had ruined more lives in counties like this than anyone would ever count. June drew in a sharp breath through her nose. My son was trying to do the right thing, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Tessa burst into tears. Yes. Carla's radio crackled then with a burst of dispatch traffic, but she ignored it for the moment. Her mind was clearly running through implications, timelines, names. Who outside the sheriff's office? She asked. Tessa shook her head. He wouldn't say over the phone. Ethan's pulse quickened. Did he tell you where the copies were? Tessa hesitated, and that hesitation changed the air immediately. Carla saw it too. Tessa, she said, voice flattening, did Luke leave evidence somewhere else? Tessa looked directly at Ethan now, like she had chosen him as the person she was willing to trust or damn. He said, if anything went wrong, I should tell his brother to check the old pump shed behind your family's first house on Miller Road. Ethan stared at her, uncomprehending for a second. Then memory hit him with physical force. The old Walker property, sold after their father died. The pump shed still standing beyond the collapsed fence line, half swallowed by weeds. As kids, he and Luke used to hide tools and baseball cards there. Later, Luke hid cigarettes there from their mother. Ethan could picture the rusted latch, the smell of oil and dirt, the warped floorboards. Carla's eyes locked on his. Don't go anywhere, she said. But even as she said it, another thought had already entered the room, unspoken and obvious. If Ben Bell or anyone tied to him realized Luke hadn't died yet, realized the money had been found but not the evidence, the old pump shed might not stay secret for long. Ethan felt the warning in Carla's voice, but what he felt more strongly was the image of headlights already turning down Miller Road, tires cutting through wet dirt, somebody with a flashlight and a gun walking toward a rotten shed that had once held childish secrets and now apparently held something men were willing to hide stolen evidence over, and the idea of sitting under hospital lights while that happened was unbearable. If Ben's dirty, he'll think like a cop, Carla said. The words clipped now. Practical. He'll go for recovery first. That means the money trail, documents, backups. If Luke left anything out there, I need it secured through chain of custody. Ethan heard every word and trusted almost none of the process behind them, not because he doubted Carla personally, but because Tessa had already dropped poison into the room by saying Luke did not trust local law enforcement, and once that kind of sentence entered the air, it changed the gravity of everything. June seemed to be having the same thought. How many deputies are on tonight? She asked. Carla glanced at her. 4 on duty, counting me. And how many of them report to a man who may already know his deputy husband is stealing evidence money? June's voice was controlled, but only just. Carla held her gaze for a long second. Sheriff Nolan's not on shift, and you know that. That isn't what I asked. Ethan watched Carla process that. He had known Sheriff Nolan all his life, had shaken his hand at county fairs, seen him pat Luke on the back after one probation review and say, "Don't make me regret going to bat for you, son." Nolan had a politician's warmth and a county man's thick calm. Until this moment, Ethan would have said he trusted him. Now he realized trust in a town like Pine Ridge had always relied on lack of information more than proof of character. Carla exhaled once. "I'm not broadcasting this over open radio," she said. "That means nobody moves on the shed but me," Ethan asked. "And if Bell is already moving?" Carla looked at him. "Then we beat him." The answer came fast enough that Ethan believed her, at least on that point. June touched Ethan's sleeve. Her hand was cool, fingers tense. "You are not leaving this hospital while your brother's in surgery," she said quietly. He turned to her. In her face, he saw equal parts fear and fury. "Mom, no." The word came out flat, final, almost harsh. "I have already spent years waiting for calls about that boy. I'm not doing it twice in one night." Ethan dropped his eyes for a moment, struggling. He understood her logic. He understood the cruelty of forcing her to sit through surgery alone. But he also knew Luke. He knew the old pump shed. He knew that if Luke had hidden something there, he had not done it casually. It meant Luke had reached backward into childhood, into the one place tied to Ethan as much as to himself. Because somewhere deep down he believed Ethan would know where to look. That thought struck Ethan with such ache that he nearly doubled over under it. Luke had thought of him. In the middle of whatever mess had swallowed him, he had still thought, if this goes bad, Ethan will find it. Carla's radio cracked again. She finally looked down at it, jaw tight, and listened. Unit 12. Status on hospital follow-up. Another deputy checking in. Carla thumbed the side button. 12. Stand by. I'm handling. She clipped it back. I need to move now, she said. Ethan. Stay put. Mrs. Walker. I'll update you the second I have anything. June's chin lifted. You expect me to accept that? I expect you to let me do my job. The two women held each other's gaze with the cold recognition of people who were both used to carrying more than was fair and resented being asked for patience. Then Carla turned and strode toward the exit. Ethan watched her go. He counted 2 beats. 3. He turned back toward his mother. She knew before he said anything. Don't, she whispered. The word broke him more than if she'd yelled. He crouched in front of her again, lowering his voice. Mom, if Luke hid something there and Belle gets it first, then whatever he did dies with Luke if Luke doesn't wake up. You know that. Her eyes filled immediately. Then let the deputy handle it. And, if Tessa was right? Ethan asked. If Luke didn't trust the office for a reason? June looked away, and in that small motion he saw the horrible truth. She had no answer because she was thinking the same thing. I won't be long, he said. I'll call you from the road. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. If you walk out that door and something happens to you too, I will never forgive either of my sons. The sentence landed hard enough that Ethan couldn't speak for a second. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead briefly against her hand. Then I better come back, he said. When he stood, Tessa was watching from her wheelchair, pale and frightened. Carla was already gone through the sliding doors. Ethan crossed to Tessa. If Belle knows you talked, where would he go first after the shed? Tessa stared at him, startled by the directness. I don't know. Think. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Her lips trembled. He keeps a storage unit off Route 9 under his cousin's name, and there's a boat dock his uncle uses near Blackwater Creek. He says nobody checks that place in winter. Ethan nodded once, memorizing it. Write them down. A nurse passing by handed him a pen without even asking why. Hospital life built on quick exchanges and assumed urgency. Tessa scribbled the storage unit number on the back of a discharge form with shaking fingers, then the rough location of the dock. Ethan tucked the paper into his wallet. If he calls you, don't answer, he said. She looked up at him helplessly. I don't have anywhere to go. June spoke from behind him before Ethan could. You'll stay with me tonight. Ethan turned. June's face was still strained and wet-eyed, but the schoolteacher's steadiness had returned in her tone. Until we know who's involved, you are not going home. Tessa looked at her as though she had expected condemnation, and instead received something she did not know how to bear. Mrs. Walker, do not thank me yet, June said. If my son lives, he can explain for himself why he thought vodka was an acceptable companion to civic courage. Ethan almost smiled despite everything. It vanished instantly, but the effort of it grounded him. Stay with her, he told Tessa, then headed out. The night air hit him hard as he crossed the parking lot. It smelled of wet leaves and diesel, and the coming drop in temperature before dawn. He climbed into his pickup and started the engine with fingers that were less steady than he wanted them to be. As he pulled out, his phone buzzed. Carla, he answered on speaker. Where are you? She asked. No greeting. Parking lot. Turn around and go back inside. You already know I'm not doing that. He heard her curse under her breath. Wind noise roared through her line. I'm 2 minutes from Miller Road, she said. If you show up and interfere with a scene, I'll arrest you. Ethan took the turn toward Main Street. Then don't make me interfere. Silence. Then, you always this stubborn? Ask Luke. That shut both of them up for a beat. Finally, Carla said, 5 minutes out. No lights. No siren. You follow my lead. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. She hung up. Miller Road lay west of town, where the paved lanes narrowed into cracked county asphalt, lined with leaning mailboxes, drainage ditches, dead soybean fields, and the occasional tired farmhouse sitting back from the road under pecan trees. Ethan drove with headlights dimmed when he made the turn. His stomach clenched the whole way. Mist hovered low over the fields, turning the world gauzy and uncertain. The old Walker property appeared on the left as a darker shape in the darkness. The house long bulldozed, but the concrete pad still there, half swallowed by weeds. The pump shed sat another 60 yards back, near a line of scrub pines, little more than a slumped box with a rusted roof. Carla's cruiser was already tucked off the road with lights off. She stepped out as Ethan approached, one hand low near her holster. You should have stayed put, she said. You should have locked the hospital doors if you meant it. She glared at him, then nodded toward the fields. No visible tracks from the road besides ours. Could mean nobody's been here yet. Could mean they parked farther down and came on foot. Ethan killed his engine. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and stopped. Carla took a flashlight from her belt but kept it pointed down. You know the layout? Used to. Then you stay behind me. They crossed the field shoulder together, boots sinking into damp earth. The grass brushed against Ethan's jeans, leaving them cold and wet from the knee down. Every step toward the shed pulled harder at old memory. He had not been here in years, not really. When their father died and the bank took more than June could fight to keep, Ethan had helped clear what was salvageable from the property. Luke had been 17 then, angry at everybody, kicking through boxes, stealing beers from neighbors who came to help. They had left the shed because it was worthless. Strange how worthless places became important again when people ran out of safe ones. At 10 yards out, Carla stopped and crouched slightly, listening. Ethan listened too. Nothing but wind shifting through pine needles and the distant hum of tires somewhere on a far highway. Carla moved to the door. The rusted latch hung half open. She looked back at Ethan. Was that ever locked? Sometimes. Not really. She touched the door edge with 2 fingers and pushed. The hinges gave a low, aching whine. Their flashlights cut into stale darkness, thick with dust and the smell of oil, mildew, and old dirt. Shelves leaned along one wall. A broken push mower lay on its side, an overturned milk crate, a rusted pipe wrench, a nest of stripped extension cords. For a moment, it looked like nothing. Then Ethan saw the disturbed patch beneath the back shelf where dust had been smeared recently. There, he said. Carla angled her light and crouched. Behind the shelf sat a metal tackle box, green paint peeling. Exactly the kind of ordinary container nobody would notice unless they knew where to reach. Ethan knew it instantly. Their father had kept nails in that box once. Carla pulled on latex gloves from a pocket and slid it out carefully. The clasp had been secured with a strip of electrical tape rather than a lock. She peeled it free and opened the lid. Inside lay a stack of printed photographs, a cheap burner phone, a flash drive in a pharmacy envelope, 3 small evidence bags still carrying county inventory stickers, and a spiral notebook swollen slightly from humidity. Carla let out a slow breath. Ethan's heartbeat thudded in his throat. Tell me Luke didn't put those evidence bags in here himself, he said. He wouldn't have the tags, Carla replied. But her voice had changed. He could hear the anger in it now. She lifted one photo first. In the flashlight beam, Ethan could see Deputy Ben Bell in plain clothes loading a cardboard archive box into the bed of an unmarked county SUV behind the sheriff's office annex. Another showed Bell standing beside a man Ethan recognized after a second as Keith Nolan, the sheriff's nephew, outside the storage units off Route 9. A third photo showed what looked like an evidence room ledger, with case numbers and handwritten annotations in red ink. Carla flipped through faster, her controlled breathing turning sharper. Jesus. Ethan swallowed. What? She showed him one image. It was a photo of a log sheet with missing cash notations beside multiple narcotic seizures over 14 months. Initials marked adjacent entries, BB, KN, and on 2 lines, SN, Sheriff Nolan. Ethan stared at the letters. The cold from the field seemed to enter him properly then, deep in the bones. Could be forged, he said automatically, though he didn't believe it. Could be, Carla said, but she didn't sound convinced. She opened the notebook. Luke's handwriting slanted rough across the pages, half-block letters, half-rushed cursive, as if he had been trying to write clearly while moving fast. Dates, times, plates, names, case numbers, storage unit visits, and repeated notes about Tessa's calls. On one page, Ethan saw his own name. If this goes bad, Ethan gets shed. He stopped breathing for a second. Carla saw it too, but said nothing. She removed the burner phone next and pressed the side button. Dead battery. We need all of this bagged and off-site, she muttered. Then both of them heard it. A vehicle engine slowing on Miller Road. Carla snapped off her flashlight instantly. Ethan killed his too. Darkness rushed in so completely it felt solid. They stood perfectly still inside the open shed, listening. Gravel crunched. A door opened. Then another. More than one person. Ethan could hear his pulse in his ears. Carla's shoulder brushed his as she shifted, drawing her weapon silently. Outside, boots moved through wet grass. A flashlight beam flicked once across the field, far left, then went dark. Low voices. Male. Too far to make out words. Ethan leaned toward Carla's ear. How many? He whispered. 2. Maybe 3. Her breath touched the side of his face, steady despite the tension. She took her radio in hand, hesitated, then did not key it. That told Ethan everything. She still did not trust the channel. The footsteps came closer. One beam flashed again, sweeping near the pines. Shed, a man's voice said, low but clear enough now. Ethan knew that voice. Ben Bell. He felt a bolt of hatred so sudden it sharpened his senses instead of clouding them. Another voice answered. Younger. Keith Nolan. You sure he had time? He called her, Belle said. Then he drove off stupid. If he stashed it anywhere, it's here. Carla's jaw tightened. Ethan could feel it rather than see it. Belle and Keith were almost at the door when a third sound intervened. Tires approaching fast from the road, then stopping hard. Someone shouted, Ben. All motion outside changed at once. Belle swore. The new voice belonged to Sheriff Nolan himself. Older, heavier, carrying command even in a whisper shout. What the hell are you doing here? Belle answered too quickly. Chasing a lead from the crash. Nolan moved closer. At midnight? Without notifying me, Keith said. Uncle, shut up. There was a silence loaded with implications. Ethan understood then that Nolan had not come to help them. He had come because somebody had tipped him that Belle was moving, and he was angry about being cut out, not horrified by the corruption itself. The realization settled like lead. Outside the shed, Belle said, If Luke hid anything, we needed it first. Needed it first. Not secure it. Not preserve it. Ethan saw Carla understand the same thing in the minute tension of her body. Nolan's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You moved without me. That makes me think you're panicking. Panicking makes mistakes. Maybe we already made one leaving him alive, Belle said. The sentence struck Ethan with such force, he nearly moved before thought caught up. Carla's hand shot out in the dark and gripped his forearm hard enough to warn him silent and clear. Outside, Nolan said, very quietly, Watch your mouth. But there was no moral outrage in it, only tactical displeasure. Belle exhaled sharply. You know what I mean, Nolan answered. I know exactly what you mean, and that's why you're done talking. Then, without warning, another flashlight beam cut across the shed interior from the doorway. Sheriff's office, Nolan called, performing now for any unseen listener. Anybody inside? Come out with your hands where I can see them. Carla met Ethan's eyes in the darkness. For one strange second, the whole night condensed into a clean line. Either they stepped out and handed evidence to compromised men, or they risked becoming fugitives from the very people meant to uphold the law. Ethan thought of June in the hospital waiting room, Luke on an operating table, Tessa wrapped in a blanket trying not to shake. He thought of Luke's note. If this goes bad, Ethan gets shed. The words were suddenly less a request than a transfer of burden. Carla leaned to his ear. Back wall, she breathed. Ethan turned his flashlight beam briefly downward and saw what she meant. Behind the mower, low to the ground, one rotted section of wallboard had fallen away years ago, leaving a crawl-sized gap into the weeds behind the shed. A child could have slipped through easily once. An adult could too, barely. Outside, Nolan repeated the command louder. Belle's steps shifted toward the door. Carla shoved the notebook, drive, and phone into an evidence pouch from her belt, then into the inside of her jacket. She left the tackle box open on purpose, a feint, or perhaps a sacrifice. Ethan dropped first to hands and knees, the damp dirt cold against his palms. He wriggled toward the gap as the beam from the doorway brightened. Now, Carla hissed. He pushed through splintered wood and dead weeds just as Belle stepped fully into the shed. Behind Ethan, a voice shouted, Movement! Then the night broke open again. Ethan hit the ground, shoulder first in wet weeds and mud, the breath punching out of him as splinters scraped along his jacket, and cold earth filled the space where certainty used to be. And then Carla was behind him, half crawling, half diving through the gap, with one hand braced over the inside of her jacket where the evidence pouch pressed against her ribs, while voices exploded inside the shed and a flashlight beam cut across the darkness like a blade. There, Keith Nolan shouted. A gun came free somewhere behind them with the unmistakable metallic click that turned adrenaline into something sharper and uglier. Ethan pushed up, boots slipping in the mud as he scrambled to his feet. The backside of the shed opened into a wash of waist-high weeds and a shallow drainage channel slick with runoff. Beyond that stood the scrub pines and the darker line of the old property boundary fence, collapsed in most places. Carla grabbed Ethan by the back of his coat and shoved him left. Tree line, she snapped. They ran bent low. The wet grass slapped against Ethan's knees, and every step felt louder than it should have. Behind them, Belle shouted, Stop! Nolan's voice came over him immediately, furious and controlled at once. Nobody fires. You hear me? Nobody fires. That command told Ethan two things at once. Nolan did not want dead bodies on Walker property, if he could avoid it, and he still believed this could be managed, cleaned, spun, controlled. Belle did not share that confidence. Ethan heard him crashing through the weeds now, closer than the others, driven not by procedure but by panic. The The drainage ditch appeared too late for Ethan to adjust fully. He jumped, landed awkwardly on the muddy bank, slid, caught himself with both hands, and felt cold water soak through one sleeve. Carla cleared it behind him with a harder, cleaner step. "Move," she hissed. They plunged into the pines, where the world narrowed into dark trunks, low branches, the smell of wet sap and old needles, and the suffocating sense that every direction looked equally wrong. Ethan knew this patch better in daylight than at night, but old instinct began returning in broken pieces. There used to be a deer path angling toward Miller Creek, a rusted fence line north, a gravel access road beyond that, used by the neighboring soybean farm. If they could reach the access road, they could separate or double back, or get to the highway. If Belle caught them before then, all of those plans collapsed into the immediate problem of a desperate deputy with too much to lose. Another beam swept through the trees behind them. Ethan ducked reflexively. Carla grabbed his sleeve and pulled him onward. "Phone," he whispered. "Can you call somebody?" "Not yet." Her breathing was fast but steady. "If I call the wrong person, we're done." Branches clawed at Ethan's face as they pushed deeper. The ground pitched gently downward. He heard Keith somewhere off to the right, circling wider. Nolan stayed behind, barking orders that sounded more like damage control than pursuit. Belle kept coming straight. That was Belle's mistake. Ethan felt it before he fully thought it. Men in uniform trained to track movement sometimes forgot how noisily anger moved through brush. Belle was loud, breaking branches, hard heel strikes, heavy breathing. Ethan slowed suddenly and pulled Carla behind the broad trunk of a pine. She looked at him with immediate irritation, but he held a finger to his lips and listened. Belle's light bobbed closer, scattered by branches, then steadied as he reached the lower part of the slope. Ethan leaned close to Carla's ear. "He's alone." She understood quickly, her eyes narrowed, calculating. "I'm not shooting him unless I have to," she whispered. "Didn't ask you to." The old fence line lay only 10 yards ahead, the rusted wire sagging between warped posts. Ethan remembered now that there was a break where he and Luke used to crawl through as kids, chasing a dog they were never supposed to keep. Belle's beam flashed across the gap without landing on it. He was scanning at chest height, expecting runners, not a pause. Ethan picked up a fist-sized stone from the damp ground and waited until Belle was almost level with them. Then he threw it hard to the far left. It cracked into another tree with a sharp report. Belle swung instantly toward the sound. Carla moved before the echo died. She stepped out low and fast, drove one shoulder into Belle's midsection, and sent both of them crashing sideways into the needles. His flashlight spun away. His gun arm came up on instinct, but Carla trapped his wrist with both hands and slammed it into a root. Belle grunted, more shocked than hurt at first. Ethan lunged in, grabbing Belle's forearm and prying it outward as Belle twisted under them with the brutish strength of a man who spent too much time convinced he was the strongest person in any room. "You stupid son of a bitch," Belle snarled, not even pretending law anymore. Mud smeared across his jaw. His eyes looked wild in the intermittent moonlight breaking through the branches. "You don't know what you're holding." "Enough," Carla said through clenched teeth. Belle bucked hard, nearly throwing her off. Ethan drove a knee into Belle's shoulder and felt the joint give enough to loosen the gun. Carla wrenched it free and rolled away with it. Belle threw his elbow backward into Ethan's ribs. Pain flashed white along Ethan's side, and for 1 second all the air went out of him. Belle shoved up, half rising. Ethan saw his face clearly then. The sweat, the mud, the raw animal panic. This was not a man merely covering corruption. This was a man watching his life collapse in real time. Belle looked past Ethan toward Carla. "You think Nolan's gonna save you?" he spat. "He'll bury you with them." Carla leveled the gun at his chest. "Don't move." Belle laughed once, breathless and ugly. "You already moved, deputy." He was right, and all three of them knew it. A branch cracked somewhere uphill, Keith or Nolan closing in. Belle saw the flicker in Carla's eyes and moved on it instantly, lunging not at her gun but at Ethan, perhaps figuring the civilian was the weaker hinge in the whole moment. Ethan absorbed the impact badly, both of them slamming into the fence wire. Rusted barbs tore through Ethan's jacket sleeve and into the skin beneath with a hot, vicious sting. Belle's forearm crushed against Ethan's throat. The man smelled of sweat, damp fabric, and stale cologne. "Where is it?" Belle hissed. Ethan clawed at Belle's wrist, vision narrowing. He thought suddenly, absurdly, of Luke at 12 years old trying to choke him in the backyard after Ethan told their mother about a broken window. Luke had stopped the moment Ethan started laughing, because even furious, Luke had always wanted an audience more than violence. Belle was different. Belle wanted outcome. Belle wanted silence. The comparison disappeared as Carla struck him across the side of the head with the butt of the recovered gun. Belle grunted and sagged enough for Ethan to twist free. Then a flashlight beam from uphill landed on all three of them. "Ben!" Keith shouted. Carla turned the gun toward the beam. "Drop it!" she yelled, though she could not see yet whether Keith had drawn on them. Ethan shoved Belle hard into the fence, heard wire snap, and stumbled backward coughing. Keith froze between the trees, one hand up, one lower at his waistband. He was younger than Ethan by several years, sheriff's nephew, always looked freshly shaved and overconfident. Right now, fear had hollowed him out. "Carla, think real careful," he said. "You don't want to do this." "Funny," she said. "I was about to say the same." Behind Keith, slower steps approached. Sheriff Nolan emerged into the weak moonlight without a weapon visible, coat unbuttoned over his uniform, hat absent, gray hair damp with mist. He took in the scene in one sweep. Belle kneeling by the fence, Ethan bleeding from the arm and throat, Carla holding Belle's gun, Keith caught halfway between compliance and disaster. Nolan's face shifted into something almost weary. "This has gotten out of hand," he said. Ethan could not believe the banality of the sentence. Out of hand, as if what had happened were a scheduling problem or a county fair fight, instead of a string of thefts, threats, and perhaps attempted murder. "Luke wrote it down," Ethan said hoarsely. "He wrote all of it down." Nolan looked at him. For a second, there was something close to genuine regret in the man's eyes. "Luke was never as dumb as people thought," he said. Belle turned on him immediately. "This ain't on me alone." "I know," Nolan said, still watching Ethan. "That's the problem." Carla's gun remained steady. "Hands where I can see them, both of you." Nolan obeyed slowly, raising empty hands. Keith hesitated, then did the same. Belle stayed on one knee, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut near his ear where Carla struck him. The whole standstill felt temporary in the worst way. Ethan knew men like Nolan did not spend decades building local power just to surrender, because a younger deputy pointed a gun at them in the woods. They waited for angles. They used other people's mistakes. They dragged out confusion until truth looked partisan. Ethan saw the same calculation in Nolan's face now. "Carla," Nolan said, voice calm and paternal. "You're upset, and I understand that. But you're making assumptions from partial evidence provided by a crash victim and a woman trying to save herself from her husband." "And the inventory logs?" Carla asked. "And the marked bags? And Belle saying you needed it first?" Nolan's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "Context matters." Ethan let out a short, raw laugh that hurt his ribs. "Context?" Nolan turned to him. "Son, listen to me. You think corruption shows up all at once in a place like this? It doesn't. It comes one budget cut at a time. One case the state won't fund. One informant payment nobody accounts for because the paperwork would get a deputy killed. One asset seizure that sits in limbo while county commissioners tell you there's no money for body armor, no money for rehab, no money for school resource officers. You start borrowing from one gap to fill another. Then the line moves. Then you wake up on the wrong side of it." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Nolan kept going. Perhaps because he had been waiting years for somebody to understand his rationale. Perhaps because confession disguised as explanation felt to him like control. Was there stealing? Yes. Did some of it go into pockets? Yes. Ben got greedy. Keith got stupid. But some of that money kept this department functioning, Carla said. "You're confessing." Nolan gave her a tired look. "No, I'm educating you." Ethan thought of Luke, broken on a highway because he had tried to drag light onto all this, and had still stopped for vodka first because he did not fully trust himself sober under pressure. The grief of that was so specific, so merciless, that it made Ethan angrier than anything Nolan could say. "He almost died," Ethan said. "Because of you." Nolan's gaze flicked toward him again. "He almost died because he drank and drove." The cruelty of the truth inside the cruelty of the deflection struck Ethan like a blow. Belle laughed weakly from the ground, sensing the advantage of division. "There it is." Carla took one step closer, muzzle steady. "Nobody else speaks." Nolan did not move. "You won't get this through local channels," he said. "By sunrise, there'll be 10 versions of this. Belle will lawyer up. Keith will say he followed orders. Mrs. Belle will be torn apart in court. Your career will be over before the state investigators even decide whether to open a file." Carla's expression did not change, but Ethan could see the hit land. Small counties punished whistleblowers better than criminals. Everyone knew it. Nolan saw that too and pressed. "Hand me the pouch," he said quietly. "We sort this clean. Ben resigns. Keith resigns. Cases get reviewed quietly. Nobody else gets hurt." Ethan felt something inside him harden. There it was, the town's oldest religion. Not justice, containment. Not truth. Survivability. And maybe 5 years earlier, maybe even 1 year earlier, he might have been tempted by it on pure exhaustion alone. But Luke was on an operating table. June was holding herself together in a hospital chair. Tessa had likely been terrorized for months in a house where every creak sounded like the beginning of punishment. Clean was no longer a word Ethan could hear without contempt. "You don't get quiet," he said. Nolan's eyes cooled. Keith looked terrified now, hands still up, but beginning to shake. Bell seemed to realize, too late, that Nolan might let him absorb most of the blame if it bought the old man distance. Desperation sharpened Bell's face again. "Sheriff," he said, "tell them about the river parcel. Tell them who signed that." Nolan didn't even look at him. That was the first real crack. Bell saw it and understood. "You son of a bitch," he breathed. Carla's phone buzzed in her pocket then, startling in the stillness. She didn't move for it. Ethan's own phone vibrated immediately afterward. For one absurd second, the woods felt full of competing emergencies and digital insistence. June, he thought. Or the hospital. He couldn't ignore that. "It could be my brother," he said. Carla gave the smallest nod. Ethan pulled the phone out carefully with his free hand. "It was the hospital," he answered, throat raw. "Yeah?" Dr. Patel's voice came thin over the line. "Mr. Walker, your brother is out of surgery. He's critical, but he's alive. We've transferred him to ICU." Ethan closed his eyes. The word struck him so hard his knees nearly gave. Alive. Not saved. Not safe. But alive. He pressed a hand over his mouth, suddenly unable to breathe right. Across from him, Nolan watched the reaction with unsettling attentiveness. Bell cursed under his breath. Carla's expression flickered just once, relief crossing and vanishing. "Can he talk?" Ethan asked. "Not yet. He's ventilated and sedated. There was significant swelling. We won't know more until morning." Ethan swallowed. "My mom? She's here. I'll have a nurse stay with her. Thank you." He ended the call slowly. The woods came back around him in layers. Damp air, pine, mud, gun oil, human breath. Luke was alive. That fact did not solve anything. It only raised the stakes. Nolan spoke again, more softly. "Then do the smart thing. Be with your family. Let the rest be handled." Ethan looked at him and saw, finally, the shape of the man clearly. Not a comic book villain, not even a full monster. Just a county operator who had spent decades persuading himself that every compromise was temporary, until compromise became identity. That was almost worse. It was ordinary enough to spread. Ethan turned to Carla. "My truck has a dash cam." Nolan's eyes shifted, sharp now. Ethan kept going. "I installed it after a deer strike last winter. It records front and rear when the truck's running." Carla understood immediately. At the hospital? Parking lot. Then Miller Road. Ethan could see her mentally laying the path. If his truck had captured Carla's call, his own movement, perhaps even some of the arrival sequence or audio depending on distance, then there was outside corroboration, not only the pouch. More importantly, the footage was not yet in anyone's hands. Nolan saw the threat in the same moment. "Where does it upload?" he asked too quickly. Ethan smiled without humor. "Cloud." That was a bluff. The dashcam only stored locally unless manually transferred. But he delivered the lie flatly, and Bell reacted first, swearing aloud. Nolan's face changed in a way Ethan had not seen before. The man finally looked old. Not frail, just abruptly aware that his usual ability to manage risk had narrowed. Carla used the silence. "Sheriff Nolan, Deputy Bell, Keith Nolan, you are being detained pending state review. Turn around, hands on the tree." Keith made the smallest movement backward, panic overtaking whatever loyalty remained. "Uncle, do it," Nolan said. And the defeat in his voice was quiet enough that Ethan almost missed it. Keith obeyed first. Nolan followed. Bell stayed kneeling another second, eyes moving between them all as if still searching for one last angle. Then he rose slowly and turned toward the tree, shoulders rigid with hatred. Carla holstered Bell's gun, drew her cuffs, and started with Keith. Ethan stood there shaking now that the immediate danger had thinned. Adrenaline drained and left pain in its place. His scraped arm, his bruised throat, the deep ache in his ribs where Bell had driven an elbow. But under all of it, something else was expanding, stranger and harder to name. It was not triumph. It was the terrible knowledge that none of this would restore what had already been damaged. Luke would wake to a body broken in multiple places and a conscience full of half-failed redemption. June would learn that the county she trusted had been rotting inside the uniform she greeted at fundraisers. Tessa would have to testify against the man she married. Carla would likely lose the career she had built, whether temporarily or for good. simply for refusing the wrong kind of loyalty. No clean solution. Nolan had been right about one thing, though not how he meant it. Context mattered. And the context was that truth, once dragged into daylight, cut everyone nearby. Carla finished cuffing Belle and stepped back. "Ethan," she said, "I need your keys." He stared at her, confused. "Why?" "Because if your dashcam really uploads, I want the truck untouched until State gets it." She held out her hand. Ethan looked at his keys, then at her. For a second, he considered telling her the truth, that the cloud line had been a gamble, but he didn't. Not yet. Maybe the bluff still had work to do. He handed the keys over. She took them without comment, as if she understood more than she was willing to say aloud. The first distant sirens reached them then. Not county this time, but state troopers from the next jurisdiction, summoned by Carla from a hidden emergency code on her phone, while Ethan was on with the hospital. Nolan heard them too and closed his eyes once. Belle sagged visibly against the tree. Keith started crying in thin, embarrassed breaths that only made Ethan despise him more. Carla stood in the dark pines, with mud on her uniform, hair coming loose, evidence hidden under her jacket, and for the first time all night, she looked less like a deputy and more like a woman who had just stepped across a line she could never uncross. Ethan understood that feeling more than he wished to. He looked east through the trees where the sky had begun to pale by a shade so slight it barely counted. The first indication that dawn would eventually come whether any of them were ready for it or not. By the time the state troopers finished separating statements under the dim wash of portable headlights and the sky lifted from black to a bruised gray over the fields, Ethan felt as if he had lived 3 separate nights without rest, each one worse than the last, and yet dawn kept arriving with the same indifferent steadiness it had always brought to Pine Ridge County, touching the wet weeds silver, revealing the sagging fence, the mud on Carla's uniform, the handcuffs on men who had spent years walking around town with badges and easy smiles. Trooper Dale Mercer, a broad-shouldered man from the neighboring district whom Ethan knew only by reputation, took custody of Nolan, Belle, and Keith without ceremony. Mercer did not ask for hometown explanations. He listened, wrote, bagged evidence, and called in additional investigators, with the blunt efficiency of someone who had learned not to let county loyalties contaminate the first hours of a scandal. That alone made Ethan trust him more than he wanted to trust anyone. Carla gave her statement in clipped, exact detail. She handed over the pouch, Belle's gun, and Ethan's keys. Ethan gave his own account next, voice rough from Belle's forearm, and from everything else, careful not to embroider any part of it because truth now felt like the one narrow bridge left. When Mercer asked about the dash cam, Ethan held his breath for half a beat, before admitting the camera recorded locally unless transferred. Carla looked at him then. One quick sideways glance, and there was the faintest flash of almost amusement under all her exhaustion. Mercer's mouth tightened, but only enough to signal that while he disliked being bluffed, he understood why the bluff had worked. "You should consider a better backup plan next time," he said. "I'd prefer not to have a next time," Ethan replied. Mercer grunted once, as if that were the only sensible answer. The investigators searched Ethan's truck anyway and removed the memory card under evidence seal. One of them confirmed the unit had indeed recorded the drive from the hospital, and enough audio near the property to matter. Not everything, not a miracle, but enough. Belle heard that from the back of the trooper sedan and looked physically sick. Nolan did not react outwardly at all, which somehow made him seem more finished. Before they loaded him fully into the cruiser, his eyes found Ethan one last time. There was no apology there, no plea, only a kind of defeated accounting, as if Ethan had become one more factor in a collapse Nolan already understood too well. Ethan looked away first, not out of weakness, but because he did not want the man's face lingering in his mind beside his brother's. Carla finished with Mercer a few minutes later and stood apart from the vehicles while the state team processed the shed. In daylight, she looked younger and more worn at the same time. Mud dried along one sleeve, hair nearly all the way loose, the night's strain etched around her eyes. Ethan walked over to her slowly, ribs protesting. "You all right?" he asked. She gave a laugh so faint it barely deserved the name. "No. You?" "No." That earned him a more genuine breath of humor, brief and brittle. They stood in silence after that, watching troopers move in and out of the shed that had once stored their father's nails, then their childhood contraband, and now had become a crime scene. Ethan felt the layers of it pressing together in strange ways. Luke had chosen this place because it was hidden, yes, but also because it belonged to a version of them before everything got so complicated. That realization sat heavy in Ethan's chest. Carla crossed her arms against the chill. "Mercer says State Internal Review will want my badge and weapon by noon." Ethan looked at her. "Temporary? Maybe. Maybe not." Depends how much everyone decides they hate what I just did. She said it plainly, without self-pity. That made it worse somehow. Ethan searched for something useful to offer and found only the truth. You did right. Carla kept looking toward the road. Right doesn't always leave a lot behind. He understood. That sentence felt like it belonged to the entire county now. He hesitated, then said, Luke's alive. Carla turned to him fully for the first time since the troopers arrived. Relief crossed her face before she had time to restrain it. That's something, Ethan nodded. I see you. Still critical. Then go. The word came gently. Your mother shouldn't be sitting there alone any longer than she already has. He glanced toward the truck, toward Mercer, toward the field, every part of him still keyed for unfinished danger. Carla read it anyway. State has this scene, she said, and if I'm wrong, I'll call you. But go be a son before you go back to being evidence. That landed in him hard. He gave a short nod and started toward the road. After 2 steps, he stopped and turned back. Tessa's with my mom. Carla's gaze lowered briefly. I know. What happens to her? Carla exhaled into the cold morning. Depends whether the state can move fast, whether Belle kept friends outside the office, whether she's willing to keep talking once lawyers get involved. And if she isn't? Carla met his eyes. Then this still doesn't disappear. Too many pieces now. Ethan wanted to believe that. He almost did. He left anyway. Mercer arranged a ride back to the hospital because Ethan's truck was impounded for evidence. The trooper who drove him was quiet, which Ethan appreciated. The county roads looked unnervingly normal in daylight. School buses were starting their routes. A man in overalls stood outside a gas station pumping diesel into a farm tank. A woman jogged with headphones along a neighborhood street, as if the night had not split open half the sheriff's office. Pine Ridge had always been good at normal. Ethan understood now that normal was often just delay. When he got back to the hospital, the waiting room smelled the same. Coffee and antiseptic and recirculated heat, but it held the peculiar stillness of early morning after a bad night, when people become too tired even for panic. June sat in the same row of chairs, cardigan wrapped tightly around herself, glasses on now, hands folded in her lap with rigid control. Tessa was beside her, slumped and asleep despite everything, head tilted awkwardly against the wall under a borrowed blanket. June looked up as Ethan entered, and all the strength she had been holding in place trembled visibly for 1 second before she stood. Ethan crossed the room quickly. She touched his bruised throat and scraped arm first, inventorying him the way mothers do, then pulled him into a hard, brief embrace. You came back, she said into his shoulder. I said I would. She stepped back just far enough to search his face. What happened? Ethan looked at Tessa sleeping, then back at June. A lot. June gave a tight nod. Then don't summarize. Sit down and tell me what kind of mess my family is in. So he did. He sat beside her in the humming fluorescent quiet and told her about the shed, the photos, the ledger, the notebook in Luke's handwriting, the pursuit into the woods, Belle's desperation, Nolan's justification, the state troopers, the evidence, the fact that this was bigger and uglier than anyone in Pine Ridge was going to want to admit. He left nothing out except the few split-second fears that would only hurt her to hear in detail. June listened without interrupting for a long time, one hand covering her mouth, the other gripping the edge of her seat. Once, when he described Luke's note about the shed, she closed her eyes and turned her face away. When he finished, the waiting room seemed to contract around the silence that followed. Tessa had woken halfway through and sat frozen, listening, tears slipping silently down her face without any movement to wipe them away. June looked at her then, not kindly exactly, but with a steadier clarity than before. Did you know it was this bad? She asked. Tessa shook her head quickly. Not this bad. I knew Ben was hiding money. I knew he was mean when I asked questions. I knew Luke said not to trust the office. I didn't know the sheriff was in it. June's expression did not soften, but it shifted from personal blame toward something sadder and more complex. Most women don't know the full shape of danger until it has already moved into the house, she said quietly. Tessa broke completely at that, lowering her face into both hands as her shoulders shook. June did not touch her, but neither did she turn away. Ethan sat there watching the two women and felt how much the night had reordered everything. His mother, who had every right to hate Tessa for being part of Luke's last spiral, instead recognized another kind of damage entirely. Tessa, who had come into the hospital as the side story to Luke's wreck, now sat at the center of a different ruin, and Luke, sedated 2 floors away, had somehow managed in his most flawed hour to do one decent, necessary thing that would cost all of them dearly. A nurse came through the double doors and called Ethan's name. All 3 of them stood at once. Only 2 for now, the nurse said gently. ICU policy. June glanced at Ethan and made the decision without words. "You and me," she said. Tessa sat back down immediately, nodding as if she had expected no other answer. Ethan followed June upstairs. The ICU corridor was dimmer than the emergency department, quieter, full of soft monitor tones, and the sterile coldness unique to places where bodies are held between outcomes. As they walked, Ethan felt his chest tightening again, not with panic now but with the dread of finally seeing what had been done. The nurse led them into Luke's room and stepped aside. Ethan stopped just inside the doorway. Machines always make people look smaller. Luke lay angled slightly upward in the bed, bandaged at the head, a ventilator tube fixed in his mouth, bruising already blooming dark across one side of his face. His skin looked waxy under the hospital light. One arm was wrapped and IV-lined. A monitor above him traced fragile proof of continued life in green pulses. June made a sound Ethan had never heard from her before, not even when their father died. It was small, involuntary, and full of ancient hurt. She went to the bedside and touched Luke's hand with the gentlest fingers Ethan had ever seen her use. "You stubborn boy," she whispered. Ethan stayed where he was for several seconds because the sight rearranged him internally in a way he couldn't immediately manage. Luke had always taken up too much room in any space, whether with jokes, apologies, anger, or appetite. Seeing him reduced to tubes and swelling and mechanical breathing felt obscene. Ethan stepped closer at last and stood on the opposite side of the bed. The bruises at Luke's knuckles caught his eye. Not all from the wreck, maybe. Some older. Ethan thought about the notebook in the tackle box, about Luke taking photos, meeting Tessa, hiding evidence, asking for one drink to steady himself like a man still bargaining with the worst part of his own nature. Love and frustration crashed together so hard inside Ethan that he had to grip the bed rail. "You idiot," he murmured, and the words held more tenderness than insult. June did not look up. "He can hear us, maybe." Ethan doubted it, but he nodded. "Then he can hear this too." He leaned slightly toward Luke. "You better wake up, because I'm not cleaning up your entire mess without at least one explanation from your own mouth." June let out a breath that was almost a sob and almost a laugh. The nurse quietly explained the ventilator, the intracranial pressure monitoring, the next 6 hours, the possibility of another scan, the need to watch for swelling. Ethan absorbed what he could. June asked sharper questions, teacher precise even in grief. When the nurse left, the room settled again, into machine sounds and weak morning light filtering through blinds. Ethan looked at Luke's face and remembered him at 8, bloody-nosed after a bike crash, insisting through tears that he wasn't crying. At 16, getting suspended for fighting a senior who called June a drunk after their father's death, even though June had never touched a bottle in her life. At 24, handcuffed after his DUI, staring at Ethan from the back of a cruiser with all the rage of someone who knew he had become exactly the town's favorite story about wasted potential. People often called Luke self-destructive, as if it were a complete explanation. Ethan knew better. Luke was not drawn to destruction for its own sake. He was drawn to relief, to absolution, to any quick off-ramp from the unbearable pressure of being the family's perpetual disappointment. That made him dangerous in all the ordinary ways. It also made moments like the one behind them, the note in the notebook, the hidden evidence, the decision to help Tessa matter more than outsiders would understand. June finally lowered herself into the chair beside the bed. She looked suddenly exhausted enough to age 10 years in 10 minutes. "When he was little," she said without taking her eyes off Luke, "he used to confess before I even knew what he'd done. He'd walk right into the kitchen and say, 'Mama, I need to tell you something before Ethan tells it worse.'" Ethan managed a tired smile. "That sounds right." Then he grew up and stopped confessing. Her voice thinned on the word. Ethan did not answer because there was nothing adequate to say. He stood there while morning spread gradually across the room and hospital life resumed outside the door. Around 9 o'clock, Carla appeared at the threshold, now in plain clothes, badge gone, face scrubbed but not rested. She looked unsure for the first time since Ethan had known her. June motioned her in. "You should sit," June said. Carla hesitated. "I'm not staying. Sit anyway." Carla obeyed, perching on the windowsill with the posture of someone not accustomed to being cared for while carrying scandal. "State has the sheriff's office locked down," she said. "Computers imaged. Evidence room sealed. County commissioners are already pretending they're shocked." Ethan let out a low breath. "Town knows? Town suspects. By lunch, they'll know. By dinner, they'll all have opinions." She looked at Luke then, and some of her professional distance gave way. "Mercer says the notebook and logs are enough to open everything, but they'll need Luke conscious if they want the cleanest chain on some parts," June said. "Then he'll wake up." Carla didn't contradict her. Tessa joined them an hour later after a social worker and a state investigator spoke to her privately downstairs. She entered the room like someone unsure she had the right to cross any threshold anymore. June made space. Ethan watched as Tessa approached the bed and stopped short when she saw Luke up close for the first time. The wreck had given her shock. The ICU gave her consequence. She covered her mouth and cried quietly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Luke. To June. Maybe to herself most of all. Ethan thought there should have been bitterness in him at the sight. There was some, but mostly there was fatigue, and the dawning understanding that blame sorted itself poorly in real life. Belle had terrorized her. Luke had tried to help and failed himself in the middle of it. Nolan had built the structure that let both things happen. Every moral line bled into another, until all you had left were injuries and choices about what to do next. The day stretched. Reporters began calling the hospital and were turned away. A state investigator took a short preliminary statement from Ethan in a consultation room and promised a formal interview once Luke stabilized. Mercer himself came by to update them that Belle and Keith were being held pending arraignment, and that Nolan had invoked counsel before noon. "No surprise there," June said. Mercer almost smiled. "None." He also confirmed that a storage unit on Route 9 had been secured, and a search warrant was underway. At that, Tessa went pale enough that Ethan thought she might faint. June took her hand then, very briefly, and Tessa stared at that act of grace as if she did not deserve to occupy the same room as it. By late afternoon, the exhaustion became its own weather system, settling over all of them. Ethan dozed for 11 minutes in a chair and woke disoriented, ribs aching and neck stiff. To the sound of June reading quietly from one of Luke's old paperback westerns she had found in his hospital bag. It was absurd and perfectly in character for her. She read not because Luke needed westerns specifically, but because he always hated silence in sick rooms and because mothers keep bizarre inventories of their children's preferences no matter how old those children get. Carla left and returned once with sandwiches, none of them wanted, but all of them forced down. Tessa agreed to go with a state-provided advocate that evening, rather than return to June's house. And June approved with a stern nod that carried more concern than warmth. "You stay where they put you," she told Tessa. "And this time, when somebody tells you not to go back, you don't go back." Tessa cried again and promised she wouldn't. The promise sounded real. Near sunset, when the light through the blinds turned amber and the monitors had become part of the room's stream, Luke moved. At first, Ethan thought he imagined it, some wishful twitch misread by an exhausted mind. Then Luke's fingers shifted against the sheet. June stopped reading mid-sentence. The ventilator hissed, Luke's brow furrowed. A nurse hurried in, checked the monitors, adjusted a line, and called for the doctor. Ethan moved to the bedside so fast his chair nearly tipped. Luke's eyes did not fully open, but they fluttered beneath swollen lids. His hand moved again, weakly, as if searching. June caught it instantly. "Luke," she said, voice trembling now without control. "Baby, Mama's here." Ethan had not heard her call him baby in 20 years. Something about it nearly undid him. Luke made a small, strained sound around the tube, panicked at first, then calmed when the nurse leaned in and told him where he was. His eyes opened a fraction, unfocused and bloodshot, wandering until they landed somewhere near Ethan's shoulder, then shifted again toward June. Recognition came slowly but unmistakably. Tears filled Luke's eyes before either of them said another word. Ethan leaned in. "You're in the hospital," he said. "Don't try to talk." Luke's gaze dragged toward him again, heavy with pain and sedation and shame. Then, with immense effort, Luke lifted 2 fingers slightly and made a weak writing motion in the air. Ethan stared, understanding hitting immediately. The notebook, the evidence, even now. "We got it," Ethan said. Luke went still. The change in his face was subtle but total, a collapse of one particular fear. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, he looked at Ethan with something Ethan had wanted from him for years and never expected to get this way. Trust without performance. Stripped of excuses. June bent over Luke's hand, crying openly now. The doctor arrived, checked responses, spoke about sedation levels and not overtaxing him, but Ethan only half listened because he was watching Luke watch them. There was no peace in the room. Nothing had resolved. Luke was alive, but broken. The corruption case would widen. Trials would come. Tessa's life had to be rebuilt from ash. Carla's career hung over a void. Pine Ridge would start doing what towns do, dividing into camps, rewriting loyalties, pretending pieces of the truth were ruder than the crimes themselves. None of that changed in the soft amber ICU light. But when Luke's gaze found Ethan again and held there, Ethan understood that the burden had shifted. Not disappeared. Shifted. The terrible thing about surviving is that it hands responsibility back to the living. Ethan reached across the bed rail and put his hand over his brother's. "You don't get out of this by nearly dying," he said quietly. Luke's mouth twitched around the tube, the ghost of an old reckless grin buried under swelling and pain. Ethan shook his head once, tears finally breaking free despite himself. No, not this time. June looked between her sons and squeezed Luke's hand harder. Outside the room, evening settled over the county that would wake the next day to headlines and denials, and whispered grocery store theories. Inside, machines kept time, and the three of them remained there in the unfinished wreckage of family, guilt, and one narrow, stubborn continuation of life that had not asked to be called hope, and yet was something close enough to force them onward.